Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to continue reading Stanley Flat Again. We're going to start today with Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is entitled Stanley Sails. You can follow along while I read. Early the next Sunday morning, Mr. Lambchop had a call from his own old college friend, Ralph Jones. "Just wanted to remind you, George, that Stanley and I have a date to go sailing today," he said. "He's looking forward to it, Ralph." Mr. Lambchop hesitated. "I should mention, perhaps, that Stanley's gone flat again." Mr. Jones sighed. "I thought he'd gotten over that." "Well, I'll pick him up at 10. Later that morning, driving with Stanley to his sailing club on the seashore, Mr. Jones inquired about a foreign visitor he had once met with the Lambchops. "A prince, yes? He around these days?" Stanley knew he meant the young genie, Prince Haraz, but it would be difficult to explain not only the genie part, but also that Haraz has returned to the genie kingdom from which he had come. "No," Stanley said. "He went home, actually." Too bad. Mr. Jones was famous for his amazing memory. "Haraz, I recall. Prince Fwazi Mustafa Asalan Marza Malik Namared Haraz." "Right," said Stanley. In the harbor of the sailing club, Mr. Jones prepared his boat, Lovebug, and explained it to Stanley. "The big sail here is the mainsail, and that's the rudder back there for steering. In this zip bag is another sail called a spinnaker. We'll use that one for extra speed when we're running before the wind. See that boat way out there, how the spinnaker is puffing out in front?" Stanley laughed. The spinnaker looked like an open umbrella lying on its side. "See over there?" Mr. Jones went on. "Between the committee boat with the judges on it and the red buoy? That's the starting line. The race ends back there, too. First boat to cross that line wins." He cast off the mooring line and the main sail filled. Lovebug headed out to join the other boats. Mr. Jones pointed. "There, that's Jasper Green's boat, Windswept. He's the one I want especially to beat." "Why, are you mad at him?" Stanley asked. "He was very rude to me once, but never mind. Let's just make sure we win." Behind the start line, they found themselves behind Windswept. Jasper Green gave a friendly wave, but Ralph Jones ignored him. "You're always in a bad mood with me, Ralph," Mr. Green said. "Why? I don't—" "Here we go." A pistol shot had signaled the start of the race. Lovebug and Windswept and the other racers glided across the start line behind the motor-powered committee boat, which led them along the course marked by buoys with bright green streamers. Stanley sat back and enjoyed himself. The sun was bright, the breeze fresh against his face, the sky clear blue, the water a beautiful slate color. There were boats on both sides of them, boats ahead, boats behind. How pretty they were, their white sails making cheerful crackling sounds as they billowed in the wind. Along the shore, people waved from the porches of houses, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. "Way to go! Looking good, sailors!" "Looking flat," one of them. Stanley waved back, knowing that teasing was kindly meant. Lovebug passed other boats, but there were many more still ahead, and now they were almost abreast of Windswept. Stanley saw that Jasper Green had hoisted his spinnaker, and the other boats had too. "I've got you beat, Ralph," Jasper Green shouted. "Well, just around this point, Stanley. Then—" "Now," exclaimed Ralph Jones. "Let's show Jasper what running before the wind really means." He attached his spinnaker to a halyard and ran it up the mast. Whoosh! The spinnaker billowed out, and Stanley felt Lovebug surge forward as it pushed by an invisible hand. "Here we go," shouted Ralph Jones. They passed 5 more boats, 3 more, then Windswept. They were ahead of everybody now, and the finish line lay ahead. "We're going to win," Stanley shouted. "Yes," Ralph shouted back. "Just wait till Jasper rip." The sound came from above. Looking up, they saw the top of the spinnaker had torn. Rip! The rip streaked downward, and now the spinnaker tore all the way down, flapped uselessly in the wind. Lovebug slowed. Drat, Mr. Jones did his best with the mainsail. Drat, drat, drat. Windswept came up behind them. Tough luck, called Jasper Green. Ha ha. Drat, Mr. Jones sighed. Nothing we can do, Stanley. Unless, this may sound crazy, but Stanley, perhaps you could be our spinnaker? What? Stanley shouted. How? Good question, said Mr. Jones. Let's see. First, go take hold of the mast. That's it. Now maybe... Excuse me, Stanley said, but have you ever done this before? Stanley, nobody has ever done this before. Mr. Jones took a deep breath. Okay, now twist around to face forward and grab the mast behind you above your head. Stanley did as he was told, planting his feet on the sides of the boat to hold him in place. The wind pressed him from behind, driving Lovebug towards the finish line. Yes, chest forward, butt back, shouted Mr. Jones. The best spinnaker I ever had. In a moment they had passed Windswept, and Stanley could not help but laugh at the surprise on Jasper Green's face. And then they were across the finish line. Lovebug had won. Back at the clubhouse, Jasper Green would not admit that he had lost. A flat person used as a sail? He had never seen that before, he said, and he went to the race committee office to complain. But he returned shortly to report that Lovebug had indeed won. The committee advised him, he said, there was no rule against a crew member allowing the wind to blow against him. Great sailing, Ralph, he said. I thought it was my race. I really did. Thank you, Jasper, Mr. Jones said. But Stanley noticed that he did not smile. Jasper Green noticed, too. Ralph, you're still mad at me, he said, but why? You spilled coffee on my white pants, Jasper, said Ralph, and you just laughed when I jumped up. What? Jasper Green seemed greatly surprised. I don't remember. Where? When? We were having lunch, said Mr. Jones, at the old Vandercook Hotel. The Vandercook? It closed down 20 years ago. Mr. Green slapped his forehead. I do remember. That lunch was 20 years ago, Ralph. 21, actually. All right, said Mr. Green. I apologize, for heaven's sake. Ralph Jones smiled warmly. Perfectly all right, Jasper, he said. Don't give it another thought. Chapter 4. Back to School. Stanley was pleased that his classmates, who still remembered his previous flatness, made no great fuss about it now. Mostly, they expressed only cheerful interest. Feeling okay, Stan? They said. And looking sharp, man. Sharp, see? Get the joke? Only mean Emma Weeks was unpleasant. Huh? Mr. Show-Off again? Emma said one day. But Stanley pretended not to hear her. He had been back at school for a week when a newspaper, learning of his unusually shaped student, sent a photograph to investigate. I'm sorry, I'll read that again. I'm going to start that paragraph again. He had been back at school for a week when a newspaper, learning of this unusually shaped student, sent a photographer to investigate. He found Stanley watching a practice on the soccer field. Flash Tobin, he said, from the Daily Sentinel. You're the flat kid, right? Stanley thought he must be joking. How did you know? He said, joking back. How did I? The photographer laughed. Oh, I get it. Can I take your picture, kid? Right here by the goalposts? Stanley nodded, and Flash Tobin took his picture. I heard there was a flat kid here before, he said. Helped catch sneak thieves at the famous Museum of Art. But that kid, I heard, got round again. It was me, Stanley told him. You go back and forth, huh? The photographer was impressed. Okay, get round now. I'd like a shot of that, too. I can't just do it when I want, Stanley explained. The first time, my brother had blown me up with a bicycle pump. Make a great picture. Flash Tobin shook his head. Well, we'll just go with that. We'll just go with flat. Stanley's picture was in the Daily Sentinel the next morning. And Arthur could not help showing his jealousy. Stanley was always getting his picture in the paper, he said. Didn't they ever see how interesting it would be to have a picture of his brother? There was a soccer team practice that afternoon, and the day was windy. It was worrisome, the coach said, the way Stanley got blown about. Perhaps for the sake of the team, he should switch to an indoor sport. Stanley loved soccer, and the more he thought about what the coach said, the sadder he felt. Mrs. Elliott, his homeroom teacher, noticed that he was not his usual cheerful self. Mr. Redfield, the new guidance counselor, is said to be very helpful to troubled students, she told him. I will ask him to find time for you. Miss Elliott spoke to him again after lunch. Such good luck, Stanley. Mr. Redfield will see you right after school today. Come in, Stanley. Sit right there, Mr. Redfield pointed to a comfortable chair. Stanley sat, and Mr. Redfield leaned back behind his desk. Now then, you do understand that anything you say here is completely confidential. I won't tell anybody. Stanley wondered what he could say that would interest anybody else. Miss Elliott tells me you seem troubled. Mr. Redfield lowered his voice. What's wrong? I'm not sure, actually, Stanley said. Mr. Redfield picked up a pad and a pen. Speak freely, whatever comes into your head. Anything special happened lately? Well, I got flat, Stanley said. Mr. Redfield made a note on his pad. I do see that, yes. How did that make you feel? Stanley thought for a moment. Flat. I see, Mr. Redfield nodded. This flatness, it's come upon you before, I'm told. Is it possible that somehow, without even admitting it to yourself, you wanted it to happen again? No way, Stanley said firmly. The first time, it was kind of fun for a while. Flying like a kite and being mailed to California. Technical issue, starting that sentence again. Flying like a kite and being mailed to California, things like that. But then I got, tired of it. And now I might get put off the soccer team. Mr. Redfield nodded again. You take no pleasure now in your unusual shape? Stanley thought for a moment. Well, sometimes. He told about being a sail and helping Ralph Jones win a race. Mr. Redfield made another note. I see. The dream of being a sail. Have you dreamt it before? Stanley stared at him. It really happened. I'm just tired of being different, I guess. Mr. Redfield pressed his fingertips together. Different? How do you feel different, would you say? Stanley wondered how Mr. Redfield could be a good guidance counselor if he had both terrible eyesight and a terrible memory. Well, I'm the only one in my whole class who's flat, he said. The whole school, actually. Interesting. Mr. Redfield made another note and glanced at his watch. I'm afraid our time is up, Stanley. Would you like to see me again? Just let Miss Elliott know. Okay, Stanley said politely, but he didn't think he would. That's the end of chapter 4. I look forward to reading the next chapter to you soon. Enjoy.